So there are some data sources, which is where does your evidence often come from? So there are common data sources that you've probably heard of and may have been a part of or even used yourself, which are interviews, focus groups, surveys, observations, document reviews, and then existing data, quantitative data, which is assessment of test results, district demographics, teacher evaluation ratings, and you might hear existing quantitative data also as referred to as secondary data. So we'll go through a couple of some of those data sources that we were talking about, and I'll go through a few here, and both Candice and I will. And so we'll talk a little bit about some of the data sources that we just mentioned here. So often, I know a lot of folks have heard about data sources such as interviews, and there are definitely advantages and disadvantages to conducting an interview. Some of the advantages are that it provides an in-depth answers and robust answers. It also can permit for more follow-up detail or clarification, and then it also is a way to build a connection and rapport between the interviewer and the interviewee, which also helps the interviewee be a lot more relaxed and much more honest in the answers that they might provide. Some of the disadvantages about doing an interview is that it is a lengthy data collection period. It might take a fair amount of time. It is costly because it takes a fair amount of time, and usually you're only using one or just a very few participants. You might not have access to everyone that you might want to interview. And then also what people say is not always what they might do. And finally, the idea about dealing with anonymity, it's more on an emphasis on confidentiality rather than anonymity. So those can be some of the disadvantages, or I like to call them a little bit more challenges in terms of dealing with interviews. Focus groups are also another well-known method, and a focus group allows for an interaction of our participants. So if you're gaining a fair amount of participants, because you usually have anywhere between 6 to 8 participants, sometimes more, that interaction between participants might actually increase the robustness of the responses and enhance responses. And then also they can be efficient in terms of collection of qualitative data from a group. So rather than just 1 or 2 participants that you might have in an interview, you can actually get more in that perspective. But the disadvantages of using a focus group, which is sometimes that group interaction might inhibit responses. So you're only getting one, you may only get 1 or 2 points of view despite having 6 or 8 or 9 people in the room. And then sometimes respondents aren't always willing to speak in a group. Some fear retribution, some fear this or become more shy. And then also, if you're looking at complex subject matter, it doesn't always allow everyone to respond, so you still may not be getting quite the amount of people that you would like. And then finally, there's no anonymity, which of course also can play in terms of the kind of information you get. And now the worry about anonymity is a little bit more is a little bit larger, because now you have other people just besides the interviewer to contend with. And then you also have heard the data source and probably been a part of several times, surveys. Surveys are pretty common and often used, and I think we deal with surveys in a wide variety of settings. Some of the advantages of them is they can cover a wide range of topics. You can get a lot of participants, and they're relatively inexpensive to administer. We all know that you can do them a lot online. Of course, there are telephone surveys, there are computer surveys, and then there's also in person. And then it can include both qualitative and quantitative data, and it also is able to help with anonymity. So folks are more likely to, in a lot of ways, to participate in surveys, and it doesn't require that connection that you may need in some of the qualitative groups. There are some disadvantages to using that. Is that very similar to just about any data collection method. Self-report might not always match what people actually do, and surveys don't always often get to the depths of things. And often it's not uncommon to use qualitative data to provide some of the why behind what you may get in a survey. And then response rates are very, very important. So the lower the response rate, the harder it is to actually be able to generalize. And we know that often in surveys, it's very difficult to get high response rates, and in fact, the average response rate on both online and in-person is anywhere between 30 and 40% on a good day. So that can be a real challenge at times.